Some women learn the hardest lessons the earliest. Emily Carter was one of them. She was 23 years old when she walked down the aisle toward the man she had loved since high school. The flowers were white. The dress fit perfectly. Her mother cried in the front row. And Emily believed, the way only the young can truly believe, that this was the beginning of everything good. They moved into a modest apartment on the outskirts of Charlotte. It wasn't much, second-floor unit, thin walls, a parking lot view, but Emily decorated it like a dream. She made it a home. That was always her gift. Turning the ordinary into something worth coming back to. Her husband was ambitious. She loved that about him at first. Big plans. Big talk. He had a vision for their life that felt exciting at 23. But ambition without discipline is just noise. And the noise started early. He spent money they didn't have on things they didn't need. Credit cards stacked up quietly, the way debt always does, slowly, then all at once. He chased opportunities that never materialized. And somewhere between the late mortgage payments and the second time she found a number she didn't recognize in his phone, the dream cracked. By 28, there was no pretending anymore. Infidelity, financial wreckage, broken trust. The kind of damage that doesn't announce itself in one dramatic moment, it just accumulates, quietly, until the weight of it becomes unbearable. The divorce was quiet. No screaming matches. No public spectacle. Just two people acknowledging that what they had built together had already collapsed. Emily walked away with two things. Her 5-year-old daughter. And a vow she made to herself on the drive home from the courthouse, gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles went white. No more chaos. My child gets stability. Whatever it costs me, she gets stability. That vow would shape the next 20 years of her life. Let's be clear about something. Emily Carter did not shut down after her divorce. She did not build walls and disappear behind them. She was not broken. She was careful. There is a difference. Over the years she dated, occasionally, thoughtfully. A widower she met through her church who was kind but ultimately looking for someone to fill a role rather than build a life. A wealth manager she connected with at a finance conference in Atlanta, sharp and successful, but whose idea of commitment was a 2-week vacation. A charming entrepreneur from Raleigh who made her laugh harder than she had in years, right up until she realized he was also making 3 other women laugh just as hard. Every time it began to get serious, something in Emily quietly shut the door. Not because she couldn't love, but because she refused, absolutely refused, to let another man's instability become her daughter's burden. While other women her age were navigating complicated relationships, Emily was building. She climbed the banking ladder in Charlotte with focused, relentless precision. She became a senior executive. She bought a home in Ballantine, one of Charlotte's most desirable neighborhoods, and she paid it off. She took solo trips every year. Paris once. Coastal Portugal. A quiet villa in Tuscany where she spent 5 days reading novels and ordering wine she couldn't pronounce. Financially secure. Emotionally self-contained. Self-made in every sense of the word. And then her daughter, her reason for all of it, left for UNC Chapel Hill. The house in Ballantine became very, very quiet. Emily had not anticipated that particular ache. She had been so focused on raising her daughter right, on giving her the foundation to fly, that she hadn't fully prepared for the silence that would fill the house once she did. It wasn't loneliness exactly. It was something harder to name. The sense that she had spent 20 years pouring herself into a purpose, and now that purpose had graduated and moved on. As it was supposed to. One night, FaceTime open, her daughter's face filling the screen from a dorm room in Chapel Hill, Emily mentioned casually that the house felt big. Her daughter looked at her for a long moment. And then she said, "Mom, you've been strong long enough. You deserve happiness. Real happiness. Not just accomplishments." Emily didn't respond right away. She just looked at her daughter, this woman she had built her entire life around, and something that had been locked for a very long time quietly shifted. That sentence opened a door. It was a Friday in late autumn when her friends convinced her to come out. A jazz show in uptown Charlotte. Nothing fancy. A venue she'd passed a dozen times but never actually entered. Her friends had been trying to pull her out more. They knew about the empty house, the quiet evenings, the tendency Emily had to fill her calendar with work when everything else felt uncertain. She almost canceled. Twice. She told herself she was tired. She had an early morning. There was a report she should finish reviewing. All of it true. None of it the real reason. But she went. The venue was warm, low lighting, the kind of place where the music fills the space without demanding your attention, it just holds you. She ordered a glass of Malbec, settled in beside her friends, and let herself relax for the first time in longer than she could remember. That's when she noticed him. He wasn't the loudest man in the room. He wasn't performing for an audience. He was standing near the bar with two other men, dressed well but not flashy, the kind of put together that reads as effortless rather than calculated. When the conversation among his group paused, he actually listened to the music. He noticed her noticing him. And instead of the aggressive approach she had encountered too many times before, he simply walked over. Calm, unhurried. His name was Adrian Keller. He said he was an electrical engineer affiliated with Duke Energy. His voice was measured and warm. He asked her questions and then, and this was the part she would think about later, he actually listened to her answers. Not nodding politely while planning his next line. Listening. At the end of the evening he asked for her number. She hesitated. Her friends exchanged a glance. She gave it. And then, nothing dramatic happened. No midnight texts. No next morning call. Just the number, handed over in a warm jazz club in uptown Charlotte, while the music played on. The first month was unlike anything Emily had experienced. No love bombing. No flood of messages. No, good morning beautiful, texts before sunrise, no declarations of deep connection after a single conversation. The kind of romantic intensity she had learned to treat as a warning sign, it was simply absent. What Adrian Keller offered instead was something more disarming: consistency. 3 texts per week. Casual, thoughtful, a question about her week, an observation about something they had talked about, a short story that made her smile. 1 phone call on Sunday evenings that lasted exactly as long as it was supposed to. No more. No pressure. He never pushed for a date. He never mentioned how much he was thinking about her. He simply remained present. Reliable, unhurried, and space, when offered to a woman who has spent years protecting her own, creates something unexpected. Curiosity. Emily found herself thinking about him on Tuesday afternoons for no particular reason. Found herself checking her phone after his usual texting window. Found herself on a Sunday evening reaching for her phone before he even called. Why wasn't he chasing? Most men chased. Why did he feel steady? Why did a few texts a week from this man feel more substantial than the constant attention she'd received from others? She didn't have the language for what was happening. The language is this: he was conditioning anticipation. Predators who rush create alarm. Predators who wait, who make themselves feel like safety itself, build something far more dangerous. They build trust. Month 2. A dinner invitation. Simple. Deliberate. Not a 5-star restaurant designed to impress. A quiet neighborhood spot in South End with good food and low noise, the kind of place chosen for conversation, not spectacle. Adrian was good at conversation. He mirrored her values back to her with surgical precision. He talked about integrity. About the exhaustion of watching people compromise themselves for short-term gains. About how he'd had to rebuild his own sense of direction after a difficult professional period, pausing just long enough to invite her empathy without overwhelming her with detail. He talked about respecting strong women. About being raised by one. About how he had spent years dating women who wanted a provider rather than a partner, and how lonely that had made him. And then, almost as an aside, so casual it didn't feel calculated at all, he said, "I've dated women who were consumed by status. What you drive, where you live, what title you hold. It's exhausting. I'm just not interested in any of that." That line landed exactly where he intended it to. Because Emily Carter had spent years wondering if men were interested in her or in what she represented. Her income, her address, her accomplishments. This man was sitting across from her telling her, directly, that he saw through all of that, and wasn't moved by it. She felt something in her chest relax. The shift had begun.
And then the warmth came. Suddenly, completely, but because it followed a month of measured restraint, it didn't feel like a flood. It felt like a reward. Flowers arrived at her office on a Wednesday. Nothing dramatic, a clean arrangement of white tulips with a note that said simply, "Because it's Wednesday and you probably need flowers on a Wednesday." The texts changed. More frequent. Warmer. Good morning messages that felt personal, not templated. References to things she had mentioned weeks earlier that she had already forgotten telling him. "You make me want to be better," he told her one evening. "I see a future with you," he said another night, so quietly and matter-of-factly that it didn't feel like a line. Here is the mechanism. When intensity follows restraint, when warmth arrives after patience, the human mind interprets it as earned. As real, as the natural arrival of something genuine rather than the deliberate deployment of a tactic. Emily lowered her guard, not all at once, not foolishly, slowly, the way a woman who has protected herself for 20 years lowers her guard, carefully, with her eyes still partially open. But she lowered it. It was around this time that Adrian invited her to his place for the first time. He had mentioned it casually, the way confident people mention things they are not trying to prove. A unit in a well-kept complex in South Park. Clean lines, tasteful furniture, not extravagant, but quietly expensive in the way that suggests a man who has always had enough and never needed to announce it. Emily walked in and felt something she had not expected to feel. Relief. She had spent 20 years watching for the signs, the financial instability, the overspending, the lifestyle that didn't match the income. She knew what that looked like. She had lived it once before. And standing in Adrian's apartment, she saw none of it. The bookshelves were real. The kitchen was stocked. The space had the settled, unhurried quality of a man who had been taking care of himself for a long time. She didn't say any of this out loud. But the thought formed clearly, somewhere beneath the conversation. This man is not after my money. He has his own life. His own stability. And that thought, that single, quiet conclusion, lowered the last of her defenses in a way that no amount of flowers or kind words had quite managed to do. They cooked together that first evening. Nothing elaborate. Pasta, a simple sauce, wine poured generously. She had always loved cooking, it was one of the places she felt most herself, and Adrian seemed to understand that instinctively. He stayed out of her way in the kitchen but stayed close. He tasted what she made with genuine appreciation. He asked her questions about what she was doing and why, the way someone asks who is actually paying attention. "You cook like someone who does it for love, not obligation," he told her. She laughed, told him she had been feeding people her whole life. That the kitchen was the one place she had never once felt like she had to be anything other than exactly who she was. He looked at her steadily and said, "Then I want to be at that table as often as you'll let me." From that point on, cooking together became a ritual. Some nights at his place in South Park, some nights at her home in Ballantine. She brought her own spices the third or fourth time she cooked at his apartment, tucking them into a small bag, slipping them into his cabinet without making a production of it. He noticed. He didn't say anything. He just smiled. It felt like belonging. That was the intention. As the weeks passed, Adrian began planting a new kind of seed. Not dramatic. Not sudden. Just a comment here and there, dropped into otherwise easy conversation. "You know, this. Back and forth between two places, it wears on you after a while. Don't you think?" Or, "I've been thinking about finding something bigger. Something that actually feels like a home. I don't know. Maybe that's a conversation for another time." She heard it as a man beginning to imagine a future. She didn't yet hear it for what it was, a man studying how to make her next move feel like her own idea. What Emily could not have known, what no one would know until much later, was that the apartment in South Park was never his to begin with. When investigators pulled the lease records in the aftermath, the truth was quiet and clinical on paper, a furnished unit, rented month to month under one of his aliases. He had moved in approximately 4 months before the jazz night in Uptown Charlotte. 4 months of setup, of building the stage, of making sure that when the right woman walked through the door, she would see exactly what he needed her to see. A man with a home. A man with no reason to want hers. 3 months in, he raised the stakes. I want to be part of your whole life. Not just the parts you show me. Emily resisted. Her daughter was not a variable to be introduced lightly. She explained this clearly, the way she explained most things, directly and without apology. He didn't push. He reframed. I understand. But Emily, if I matter to you, should I really be something you keep separate? That's not a relationship. That's a compartment. She heard it as an expression of wanting more. Of being serious. Eventually, she agreed. Her daughter was home for a weekend from Chapel Hill. Dinner at the Ballantine house. Emily cooked. Adrian arrived early, brought wine, complimented the home in a way that felt genuine rather than performed. He asked her daughter thoughtful questions about her studies. He laughed easily. He helped clear the table without being asked. After he left, Emily turned to her daughter with the quiet expectation of approval. Her daughter was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "He's polished, Mom. Like, really polished. He talks like he's rehearsed." Emily laughed it off. Told her she was being too critical. That she was projecting her own guardedness onto a perfectly good man. But the comment lingered. Children, unburdened by the need to be polite, by the desperate wanting of their parents, sometimes sense the scripts that adults miss. Isolation, when done well, doesn't look like isolation. It looks like presence, closeness, the natural evolution of two people choosing each other over the noise of the world. Adrian began spending more time at the Ballantine house. Overnight stays became routine. He learned her schedule, the 6 a.m. jog around the neighborhood, the Wednesday evening calls with her banking team, the Friday nights she preferred quiet over company. He now had the garage code. The alarm access sequence. He knew her home the way only a person who has studied it knows a home. Small comments began appearing in the spaces between warmth. Your friends are lovely, but they don't really understand who you've become, do they? They still see the old version of you. This is our time now. We don't have to share every piece of it with other people. Each comment, on its own, sounded like intimacy. Like a man who wanted her fully. Together, they were the slow removal of her external support system. Isolation isn't dramatic. It's never a locked door or a raised voice. It's gradual, gentle. It looks like love right up until the walls close. It started small. A mention of a contract dispute at work. Nothing dramatic, just a delay in payment from a project that had run over schedule. He didn't ask for anything. He simply mentioned it, the way a person shares frustration with someone they trust. 2 weeks later, a note that the employment situation had become complicated. A restructuring. His department affected. He never begged. He never asked directly. He implied, with the masterful restraint of someone who had done this before, and he waited. Emily offered. A small amount. Enough to help without disrupting anything. He accepted with gratitude and something that looked remarkably like reluctance. 3 weeks later, he repaid part of it. Unprompted. With a handwritten note. That repayment was the most expensive thing he ever gave her. Because what it purchased was not goodwill. It purchased certainty. The deep, hard to dislodge certainty that this man was trustworthy. Then came the opportunity. An electrical contracting firm. A gap in short-term capital between a large commercial contract and its first payment. A chance, time-sensitive, real, documented, to be part of something significant. He presented everything. A lease agreement for the firm's office space. Letters from contractor partners. Business filings with the state of North Carolina. A timeline for capital return with interest. $60,000. Every document looked legitimate, because they had been designed, carefully, professionally, to look exactly that. Emily wired the funds. She couldn't have told you what triggered it. Maybe it was 20 years of banking instinct. Maybe it was her daughter's voice, he talks like he rehearses, still sitting somewhere in the back of her mind. Maybe it was simply the part of her that had survived once before and knew, somewhere below conscious thought, that survival requires verification. She looked up the business address on the lease. Mailbox rental. Not an office. Not a suite. A mailbox in a commercial rental facility that anyone could have for $30 a month. She stayed very still for a long moment. Then she called Duke Energy's corporate HR line. She asked to verify employment for an Adrian Keller, electrical engineer. The answer she received was 4 words. No one by that name. The floor shifted. This was not a misunderstanding. This was not a coincidence or a clerical error. This was structure. Deliberate, constructed, and targeted. She hired a private investigator. Said nothing to Adrian. Continued the relationship with a steadiness she would later describe as the hardest thing she had ever done in her life. What the investigator surfaced over the following 2 weeks was a portrait of a professional. Multiple aliases, short-term lease history across 3 states, prior fraud complaints that had never reached prosecution, and one name, a woman from Atlanta, divorced, professional, financially independent, who had gone missing 18 months earlier. Whose case remained open. Adrian Keller was not unlucky. He was not troubled or misguided or the product of difficult circumstances. He was experienced. She confronted him carefully, not with everything she knew. Just enough. I checked your employment at Duke Energy. They have no record of you. She watched his face. He didn't explode. He didn't reach for an explanation. He went cold, quietly, completely, the way a machine powers down. And then he turned it around. You don't trust anyone. You never have. Every man you've ever had feelings for, you found a reason to sabotage. Do you realize that? You're projecting your trauma onto something real. This is exactly what you do, Emily. You get close to something good and you destroy it. Gaslighting is most effective on people who already carry doubt about themselves. Who have spent years wondering if their caution was wisdom or damage. Emily held the line, but she felt it, the pull of his words. The old question, am I the problem? She didn't waver, not visibly, but he read her. He studied her responses the way someone studies a structure they've built, looking for cracks. And he realized she was slipping away. Predators don't fear the end of love. They fear exposure. The occurrences began quietly. Her security camera, the one covering the front driveway, showed a glitch in the recording history. A 40-minute gap she couldn't explain. The garage light that had worked perfectly for 3 years stopped working. One morning she came downstairs and one of the gas burners on her stove was slightly open. Not fully, just slightly. She told herself she must have bumped it the night before. Then the brake warning light appeared on her car's dashboard during her morning commute. She took it to her mechanic the same afternoon. He called her back within the hour. Ms. Carter, I need you to come in. The brake line, this looks like it was tampered with. This wasn't wear and tear. Someone did this. Fear became certainty, but Emily Carter did not call Adrian and confront him. She did not go to pieces. She did not warn him that she knew. She prepared. She shared everything with the private investigator. She contacted Charlotte Mecklenburg Police and laid out what she had, methodically, professionally, the way a senior banking executive presents a case. She had the investigator install additional hidden recording devices in her home. And then she kept seeing Adrian. She smiled at his texts. She made plans with him. She gave him no indication that anything had changed. This was the performance of her life.
He suggested a weekend away. A reset. A lake house north of Charlotte, up near Lake Norman, somewhere private and quiet where they could work through the tension between them. He framed it as an act of investment. Of trying. She agreed. Law enforcement was already briefed. The evening was warm for the season. The lake sat still and dark beyond the dock. Adrian opened a bottle of wine and poured 2 glasses, and for a long time they sat and watched the water together in a silence that might have looked, from a distance, like peace. He moved closer. He put his hand over hers. And then he leaned in close and said, quietly, as if it were an intimacy, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. You were never supposed to look deeper, Emily. Everything would have been so much easier if you'd just stayed at the surface. He shifted his weight on the dock, calculating, and then the lights came, flashing across the water, footsteps on the dock, officers moving with calm authority from both sides. Adrian stood up. And for the first time since the jazz club in uptown Charlotte, for the first time since Emily had known him, the composure left his face. He looked afraid. Not of justice. Of being seen. The investigation that followed confirmed what the private investigator had begun to surface. 3 aliases across multiple states. A pattern of targeting divorced professional women between 40 and 55, financially independent, emotionally guarded, living alone. A trail of financial victims. A methodology so consistent it had clearly been refined over years. And the woman from Atlanta, whose case remains open. Among the details that emerged, quiet, clinical, devastating in hindsight, was the lease record for the South Park apartment. The unit Emily had walked into and felt relief. The kitchen where they had cooked together. The shelves she had studied and thought, this man has a real life. A furnished rental, month to month, signed under one of his aliases approximately 4 months before he walked into that jazz club in uptown Charlotte. 4 months of preparation, of building a stage so convincing that a woman with 20 years of hard-earned instincts walked onto it and felt at home. He had not chosen her at random. He had chosen her the way a professional chooses, carefully, deliberately, with full knowledge of what he was doing and exactly how long it would take. He wasn't emotional. He was operational. Months later, a quiet Sunday morning in Ballantine. Emily sits with coffee, the winter light coming low through the windows of the home she owns, the home she built, the home no one took from her. Her phone buzzes. Her daughter's name on the screen. Mom, you okay? Emily looks at the light on the floor for a moment. She smiles. Small and real. I am now. The most dangerous predators don't break in. They knock. They wait. They make themselves feel like safety. And they wait to be trusted. She outsmarted the predator. Thought her life was back. Thought the nightmare was over. But the shadows were still there. Adrian wasn't acting alone. Subscribe to see how Emily fights back, exposes the truth, and uncovers the darkness hiding in plain sight.